Welcome everybody to PharmaComms TV. This is a very exciting day today because we have our first webinar and some wonderful guests to talk about some wonderful topics today. Today we're going to be talking about shifting the paradigm from sick care to healthcare, and joining us will be Richard Schwartz, Life Sciences Industry CX Practice Lead at Medallia, Ellen Half-Davies, CEO at Pareto, Chair at Metabolic Support UK, and Chris Easton, Global Commercial Leader with Takeda. So welcome everybody. I know we're in various parts of the world and various levels of daylight, but it's great to have you all here. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. First of all, I think this is a fantastic and really interesting area to look at, and we have a very interesting story to talk about to kind of pivot around that. And this is the Pip Harry's Vendée Globe project, where I suppose, Richard, maybe you might talk a little bit about that. So for those of us that haven't heard or aren't as familiar as others, can you give us a little bit of background and talk about kind of how you guys got involved?
Sure. So first of all, the Vendée Globe, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the most grueling tests of endurance known to men and women around the world. And it is a solo sailing race. So you are alone sailing around the world, which is pretty incredible. So when we connected with Pip Hare at Medallia, we decided to use our technology to enable constant feedback to help her optimize and drive her exceptional performance. So videos recorded by Pip using one of our technologies called Living Lens helped her and her team keep pulse on her physical and mental health by analyzing sentiment in her words, how they're spoken, and her facial expressions.
That's phenomenal technology to be able to do that in the first place. But you're measuring something more than just biostats. Then you're measuring her emotional state. Is that correct?
Yeah, her emotional state. And I think, the wonderful thing about the technology is as you're isolated, she shared some really interesting sentiments and some beautiful advice. She was just about to enter the Southern Ocean, which is one of the most remote places in the world. And she said to everybody that was able to hear the video through our technology and hear her voice that she had chosen to isolate. And that's not the case for everybody at the time, right? As we were in the height of the pandemic. And she offered some advice that she said, maybe this will help you. And she said, for me, it puts structure around my isolation. So her kind of 4 points were: have things around you that you love, connect with the people that you love through pictures, through playlists, do something you love, do the things that make you happy, be outdoors if you can, even though we were isolating, get out and get fresh air. But she said, most importantly, you don't have to feel alone because, you can connect with people digitally. You can share news and you can listen to others.
Ellen, what was your involvement? You were involved in the project as well, that's correct?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have known Pip for about 10 years now, and I've competed in a few endurance events with her, most notably the Three Peaks Yacht Race, where we sailed from the three highest peaks in the UK, and very proud that we took line honours as the first all-female crew to ever do that under Pip's. And I've also competed in round Great Britain and Ireland. So I've seen Pip in action, as it were, but she is just a step above, as mere mortal humans. She would always sort of leave me standing. But I was thrilled that Pareto also got involved with monitoring Pip's well-being while she was offshore. So it was a combination of a wearable device to look at the amount of time that she was spending in maximum heart rate. We already mentioned the emotional and sort of isolation part of it, but she had a very old boat that required a huge amount of physical strength to manage. And there were times that she climbed the mast, had to fix various, impressive fixing. And we could see that her heart rate was literally through the roof at that time. And then see how that matched with her recovery, her sleep cycles. She was cat napping, sort of 20 minutes cat nap here and there. And how then that linked to her calorie intake, And, you know, she did end up with this massive calorie deficit, even by the time she was entering the Southern Ocean. And in hindsight, I think this will be one area for her next campaign that we'll be really looking at changing her calorie input prior to the Southern Ocean, so that, you know, she can sustain those physical environment. So yeah, it was slightly different data input, but still, you know, real time to see how her fatigue, sleep, and heart rate was responding in those environments.
What does Aparito normally do? What's your day-to-day business? And like, are you normally kind of measuring sports people, or what are you normally day-to-day doing?
No, so normally we support decentralized clinical trials primarily. So we have a software platform that highly configurable, disease agnostic, and we sort of configure it to look at the endpoints that's of relevance to that clinical trials, for supporting, as I say, more patient-centric or remote decentralized clinical trials. So the remote part is definitely where we like to operate, but certainly PIP's remoteness is unique. We are currently sponsoring an all-female crew called Girls Who Dare, who've just left San Francisco to row across the Pacific Ocean to Hawaii. But this is very much my passion for supporting female athletes, and the fact that there's just such a lack of research on how women respond to endurance sports relative to the amount of research and, you know, supporting male athletes. So it's a personal hobby and passion of mine. That's
fascinating. And then the data, when all that data comes in, I presume there's a challenge around analyzing it, visualizing it. Is that something that your platform kind of does? And did you do the same for PIP? Is there a way of kind of almost seeing a virtual version of PIP built out of data? Is that how you make your decisions?
Yeah, so we pushed the data from her heart rate and sleep to marry with the data of the sea state and the wind states that she was working at that time. But, you know, I'm sure Richard will elaborate from their point of view. It's the illustration and the real-time dashboard features that get people excited about data, because sometimes there's so much of it, understanding what's important and what's not. And for us, you know, what was fascinating and people loved to see was the extreme heart rates at the time she was up the mast or fixing the tack or fixing the rudder. That just really brought it to life. Emotional and physical stress PIP was under at that time.
Before we go to you, Chris, maybe we'll go back to you, Richard, then on that. I know it's kind of pick up on that idea. I know you often data can seem a little bit dehumanizing, but you see it in a kind of a different way, more about connecting people.
I do, and it you know, data feels very binary, right? When it comes in and we break it down into ones and zeros, and it's really about the X's and the O's. It is really about understanding what is happening behind what we're seeing in the data. What data are we actually missing? What's kind of between the raindrops of the data that's right there in front of us? And when we start to look at how people feel about what's happening, it tells a whole other story, because emotions drive decisions, particularly in health and wellness. And so as we start to understand that in this experience, this patient felt this while they were doing this, it becomes really fascinating. And I love what Aparito is doing, because we see things like an increased heart rate at a moment. We see things that are biometric, but they're occurring because of something. And if we can connect those things, we start to be able to ease some of the burdens, or at least understand where they are predominantly happening.
Okay, Chris, from point of view of yourself and Takeda, this stuff is obviously, it's phenomenal when it comes to what we're talking about, which is this idea of kind of the healthcare paradigm rather than the sick care paradigm. Can you talk a little bit about that idea and how it pertains to what we've been discussing so far?
Sure. I think like the proviso would be, what if we take the paradigm that what we currently do and maybe have been historically doing in healthcare is we manage sickness, and when that happens, we treat it and try and bring health back up. But what I like, and particularly about what Ellen is talking about here, is monitoring how can, in the PIP example, how can we keep PIP as healthy as possible so that when she goes into the difficult environment, she's got the best energy reserves, she's had the best possible rest, not the case when you're climbing a mast before hitting the Southern Ocean, but trying to get yourself into this space and transferring that type of thinking across into the healthcare space and managing diseases. What is it we can do with the population that looks at how do I keep someone at the highest possible level and predict, to Rich's point, what are the markers that we can learn about behavior's response to and how we can pick them up as data points based on emotional elements or how your face is looking or how your heart is responding or, through wearables, etc., and apply that to be able to generate information that can give us markers that can tell us, actually, this is trending towards something. Do you want to intervene? So then for me, and what we're trying to look at and trying to understand is, while we accept that drug therapy is part of the solution for people that then have a problem, this is all about the non-drug components to care. There's maybe some new terminology that starts to come in, but we start thinking about what is it within that ecosystem. If drug-centered therapy is at the center, what are the pieces that build out from it as concentric circles that will actually enable you to provide holistic care for patients, markers that will predict if something is happening, and therefore you can take action to ultimately mitigate what that event may be, i.e. stop the dip in health being to a low point and try and keep it as high as possible, or inform them that they could change a behavior to maintain health. Slightly different to the PIP example where she's going into the Southern Ocean regardless. It's not like she can stop, but ultimately giving her the markers to predict what's coming and what does she need to do to best prepare herself. Does she need to take an extended rest period if time allows? Or does she need to prep the boat to get it in and be ready so you're in your boat and yourself, your ecosystem is in the healthiest possible place? Transfer that to the patient and the healthcare provider environment and work as a team to build your ecosystem accordingly. That's where we're trying to head and how we're trying to identify opportunities to drive the standard of care and ultimately outcomes for patients forwards.
And I know that, of course, we want to talk about patient centricity. We want to always talk about the patient being at the core of what Takeda or any other pharma company wants to do. But what's the end game? From the point of view of if using data or data in this way is successful, does that not mean that you have a less reliance on the pharmacological solution? Or how does that? It's better for patients, but is it better for you guys?
I think this is part of the paradigm shift. I give you my personal opinion is probably the best thing in this situation, but we are going through an age of digital revolution, if you like. If you think about when the Industrial Revolution came in, what did that look like? We're seeing better infrastructure being built all the time. We're seeing costs for computing and data analysis coming down all the time, but we are not done. We're at the beginning of that journey. Likewise, to advance health, we need to understand how we can capture the advances in technology and the use of data in order to drive healthcare into a better place. So the paradigm is, yes, we make our money through drug sales, essentially, in a simplistic format. But the future is about how do we monetize the ecosystem and how do we ensure that what is being offered is the best value, because it's about maintaining the health of a population. So yes, will be part of it, but how do we provide the whole thing, and how do we then look at what the value is for that and what the proposition would be? Take a simple example. You go to a payer and you would offer them the drug solution, that's X, and it will give you outcome Y. But if you give them the ecosystem approach, which includes the drug, you will likely, or we believe that you will have outcome X plus A plus B plus C, because you're adding additional components. So you're maintaining the patient in a far better place. You're treating them earlier. You're dealing with a lot more of the additional problems, the emotional side, as Rich was referring to. What is it about their disease state that causes anxiety or pain or issues that causes other problems and has a knock-on effect around mental state or overall well-being? So, that's our challenge. That's where I see what we need to do is identify how to enable this paradigm shift that focuses on patient centricity and delivering outcomes, but looks at everything as a whole. So, that's the leaders are going to be the guys that win in this space and are willing to transform the way we approach. I'm hesitant to use the word disruption because you only recognize disruption after the fact. I think incremental change and transformation is what we're trying to do, and that's our pot of gold at the end of the day.
Ellen, with that in mind, with the idea of, okay, where you yourself have participated in a lot of events and will continue to do, and we have the next leg of the race, or the next race in 2024, is it? So how is that data being used? How are you changing what you've done the last time to now? Have you received any kind of biometric data that says, okay, here's how PIP should change things, or here's how we should change measurements?
So one of the key things that we've been looking at is the calorie deficit that PIP was at quite early on in the race meant that she was already running a little bit on an empty tank before she hit the Southern Ocean. And so one of the key things we'll be looking at, sort of saying, how can she store up in those critical couple of weeks, while it's, she was having the best sailing time of her life, but she was still having calorie deficits. And so we needed to sort of just relook at that early, what we would now sort of refer to as preventative healthcare. Let's put some things in place to get you through the next bump in the road kind of thing. And then the other part, of course, is sleep and hydration. It was a little bit hard to monitor her hydration, but again, towards the end, she was having some serious tablets to help her through the pain and stuff, which a combination of sleep and she had some crushing blows when the rudder snapped. She dropped back a couple of places when she'd been having some really good run of things. And so being able to manage that sort of emotional expectations and highs and lows and sleep deprivation. And I think, doing something for the second time, she's going to be better emotionally prepared. And then we can sort of hopefully then give her feedback more in real time about, you're not firing on all cylinders at the moment. Let's not make too many bigger decisions. Let's go and have a power nap, drink, eat, and then make the decision, unless, it was emergency required. And I think, to bring it back to sort of healthcare as opposed to sick care, what we really want to do is develop these concepts of digital therapeutics and digital decisions, so that we're able to inform and support decision before it becomes to a health, a sick care crisis point of view. And these where digital biomarkers such of this will hopefully become more mainstream.
So is PIP, I suppose, the pioneer, from point of view of what it might be like for all of us as patients, as people, in the not so distant future, that we have, a team of people that are monitoring our biometrics on a regular basis and advising us how to remain healthy, rather than going to hospitals and treating illnesses. Is that a reasonable vision, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Pip certainly had, she had Lou, who was providing a lot of healthcare advice via sort of telemedicine and photos of allergic responses and UV responses and burns and things like that. So she definitely illustrated the telemedicine photos and heart rate assessments could be done from all four corners of the world. And yes, we've really, whether it was a combination of COVID and people being more available to follow Pip's adventures, but also Pip is such a fantastic communicator that we got an insight into that sort of world, that she was a first in really bringing home to us landlubbers at the time what it was really like.
Richard, all of this kind of, what would you call it? It's like a portrait of somebody in numbers, in ones and zeros, X's and O's. You use the term, was it the quantified self?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as a quantified species, right, we're being measured all the time. These devices, these magical devices that we all walk around with our pockets, know quite a bit about us already. And as we start to add more complex devices for care at a distance, as we start to add things that can check in on us, give us that check engine light, then the opportunities are pretty amazing. You think about the fact that I can check the oil pressure and the tire pressure in my car from right here. Why can't my doctor look at my blood pressure? Why can't, we look at when somebody might be growing increasingly anxious and do things to divert that. And I think the more these things become invisible, the more they become beautiful. And that's kind of, for me, what innovation is radical simplification. How are we simplifying these things so it does become invisible? And we do just have that very brief check engine light that lets us know, do this, but don't do that.
Maybe I can jump in and add on this. I think something that's important here is, for me, it's about the application of everyday technology. As Rich refers, we've all got a phone on the desk next to us. We may even have two, or you're wearing a smartwatch or something. These things are starting to integrate into our lives as everyday things. Our kids are using them as if it's normal. We might go and try and swipe the TV, and then that's not how the big thing works. It's the little thing. But I think it's integration of everyday technology and understanding that this data collection is happening. And it's about, the simplification of the complex and pulling it through and using it to really start to map out how can we benefit this, whether we called it passive data capture, or we'll always have a word for it, we'll have a terminology that we're talking about, the use of wearables, passive data capture. But really, I think it's about where can we learn about how this is. The sports world, I think, is such a great example of what's going on. PIP is one. Professional football, American football, you name anywhere that there's big money involved in sport. Okay, sailing maybe not so much, but in the big money sports, they want to keep their athletes at the best possible level. So they're measuring a vast array of metrics. To Rich's point, why couldn't you then transfer that straight into the healthcare world and say, okay, well, if I'm monitoring heart rate, stress levels, activity or whatever, well, what does that mean into the healthcare sector? What does that mean into patients with chronic diseases? How can we use that? How can I use their phone as a passive monitor that when they look at it, I measure anxiety or I measure stress through facial recognition, and I start to apply that through. And if something is increasing and they have a chronic disease, what's the driver of that? What other metrics start to come in? And Rich referred to it right at the very beginning, the raindrops of data. I talk about in my organization, identifying the constellations of stars in the galaxies of data. This is exactly it. It's pulling it through and applying it in the right place. From my perspective, pharma doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It needs to find it and transfer it and scale it and work with the people that know how to do it. If we need to build a car, we don't have to become Tesla. We can ring Tesla and say, we need a vehicle. That should be where we are. We need to partner and work with the right people and integrate it in. And that's why all these organizations are so important for driving innovation.
I think it's very interesting the way we see pharma companies and technology companies moving towards each other. And one of the challenges they're in from a cultural point of view is that, pharma companies are traditionally used to moving slowly and cautiously. It take 12 years normally before COVID to get a molecule to the market. Whereas, the tech companies move fast and break things, which would seem to be very opposing cultures. So, when we talk about changing a mindset, what we also need to, I suppose, find that middle ground where both of these cultures can find some place to talk. And I suppose it is already happening. Chris, can you talk about anywhere where you're currently seeing really good progress in this area from point of view of pharma and technology really working well together, and where we're seeing some really positive results?
I think that across the industry, we are seeing change. We're seeing, one, there's a realization that we need to learn about this, and there's a general feeling that the early adopters will be more successful than the laggards. I guess that's a general market trend across everything. You can look in banking and say exactly the same thing. I think where we are learning, and I'll speak as an industry, is identifying who we should be partnering with. You know, if we need to work with a cloud network, we're going to Azure, we're going to AWS, these guys, rather than trying to build it ourselves. But if we want to learn about driving innovation and what's going on in other areas, then, you know, it's about outreach to maybe the right university groups. You know, you've got the likes of the MIT Media Lab, you've got MIT Sloan, you've got all sorts of things going on around different places in the West Coast US, you've got things happening in out of Israel. There's some great health hub work that's going on, the same with the Nordics, etc. You know,
yeah.
It's about identifying who you can partner with there and have a willingness to partner. I still think the mindset issue is a challenge, and that's an evolving beast. You know, revolution is not an overnight thing. And actually, when you look at what happened in the digital world and in terms of technology, in many ways, things took 10 years. We don't realize that actually it was a 10-year window. We're still at the beginning of that, so we need to identify our partners. It's about the willingness to partner and trust, and exactly as you say, clash together those cultures. And learn in pharma that failure is a success, because, you know, fail fast means we've learned what didn't work and be able to move on. So that mindset is cultural, and it's about leadership, learning about it and what it means. And actually, it's not about return on investment. It's about learning and incremental and building on top. Where technology advances so well is it builds on the previous technology. And it springboards, and that's why you see these exponential growth in the speed of processing or the ability to use certain tools. And, you know, what we need to not get tied up in is, oh, I need to have an AI solution or ML, and I need to do this. But, you know, if you're in a data poor environment, you're not going to get a very good solution. So you need to look at what is it we're trying to do, find out your cause and identify the data you need to support that, and then kind of partner with the right people to move it forwards. And that's a challenge, I'll be honest. It's, you know, we have people within our organization that are now focused on strategic partnerships. You know, part of their role is to look forward and find who we should work with. And they may not be the traditional people that you would consider.
Penultimate question to you, Richard. This idea that sickness is a cost. And wellness is an investment. Is that a you know, enough of a motivating factor? Do you think enough people think that way to get them to start moving this direction? Because obviously there are challenges, or there's fears around data as well. There's fears around data privacy. But, you know, as you say, you know, wellness is an investment, sickness is a cost.
Yeah, well, you know, when we think about that notion of sickness being a cost and wellness being an investment, we have to look at the rising costs of healthcare, which are untenable. As we see older populations in the US alone, 10,000 people turn 65 every single day, and we do so sicker than we did in the past. And so that's going to be really hard to manage and untenable to manage if we don't start to think about things differently. And I loved what Chris alluded to a moment ago about partnership, because I think partnerability is a capability. It's not something you just do. There are skill sets that are necessary around partnering. And the only way we're going to get out of where we are is to partner our way out of it. No single entity is going to solve it alone, because the skill sets are different and the necessary talent. So hybridity becomes a really, really beautiful thing for life sciences. What life sciences does, I mean, think about this for a moment. They create molecular entities that change or alter or delay the course of disease in the human body. That's a miracle. I mean, right? That's miraculous. So the clinical aspects, to an extent, are within our control. But then, you know, we give that therapy to a patient who is in the wild, who has their own proclivity toward their own behaviors. So suddenly, along with the clinical, we have the logistical. You have to get it. You have to take it. You have to understand it. We have the personal. How do I feel about it? Am I sad? Am I upset? Am I scared? A scared patient's very different than an angry one. And then behavioral. I've got to incorporate this into my life, into my new reality. So, you know, I think what we learned during the pandemic from life sciences in terms of speed and in terms of partnerships was we had to move at the speed of need in life sciences. And so the wonderful thing that came out of it is now that we know we can, we're kind of short on excuses for why we aren't. Mm-hmm. And we have to start to move faster and differently and be more nimble.
Okay, finally, a vision of the future. Ellen, you talk maybe a little bit about the teams that you guys are working with now. You mentioned earlier on, and maybe give me I'd like to hear everyone's vision of the future. But Ellen, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess just to follow, and what COVID has done is really propelled this. We've been trying to do this for 7 years now, and we were knocking on closed doors. Really, it was a little bit of a risk averse, kind of, oh no, let's not go there, or let's wait for somebody else to do it. And for all the devastations of COVID, and I never would have wished for it, it has turned what we've been trying to do from being a nicety to becoming a necessity. And all of a sudden, farmers are really looking at this in a different way. Even in clinical trials that you do still need some hospitalization, we're not advising that gene therapy intervention will be done by the kitchen table anytime soon, but that there is an awareness that you need increased capacity to see the patient at home, capture data, and sort of standardize the way that data is coming from. And hopefully, this digital storm will be patient centricity and patient empowerment now colliding with the cultural shift in that, it's already been proved that we can do it in some shape or form during COVID. Now let's invest in making it better and faster and more efficient and lead to better healthcare outcomes. So what in a sentence, how I wish my vision will be is that we take clinical trials to the patients and we don't bring patients to clinical trials.
Nice. Richard, Chris, the future, what are your predictions for the new adapted pharma model? Richard, maybe I'll go to you and let Chris give you the last word.
Sure. So if I were to rip a headline out of the future, I think that we start to prove that patient and professional experiences are a medicine, right? The treatment effect, things being easy, being effective, having empathy. There's a ton of power in that. There's a great quote from Vijay Pandey from Andreessen Horowitz back in 2017. It's going to seem backwards and even barbaric that our solution to everything was just giving out a pill.
Chris, it's back to money.
It's back to me. I think firstly, I want to circle back. I think the terminology development at the speed of need is fantastic. I truly agree that the development of what happened around solutions for COVID was revolutionary in our industry and has now set a standard that says, the speed of need in rare diseases exists. The speed of need for diabetes as almost as a pandemic in its own right, obesity, these things exist. But I think my vision combines both of what Ellen and Rich are talking about. It's about the integration of all of the things that we've been talking about today. For me, it's truly about seeing a paradigm shift that governments and people talk about maintaining their health rather than treating their sickness. And that to do that, solutions are integrated into daily life and accepted as quality things that benefit us rather than someone's trying to implant 5G into me and to everything I'm doing. It's like, I'll quite willingly accept a superpower if they can give it to me. I'll take languages straight off. But for me, it's about that. It's this drive towards truly managing health, driving towards maintaining the best we can for patients, but integrating it into their lives in a way that people don't know. That it is quiet, it's seamless, it can be done at home if needed, it can be done in the center if needed, but the continuum of care is complete, and it grows with them and moves with them and adapts to their needs accordingly and integrates with solution. The speed of need is the driver for that for me. So yeah, I think that captures it very nicely.
I heard that not only does the Pfizer vaccine make you magnetic, but also Bluetooth enabled. So I thought that was, that was handy.
And I don't appear to be magnetic right now. So
Give it time. Give it time.
Yeah.
You'll be on the tube leaning against the door, and then you won't be able to get off at your stop. You know.
Yeah, I'm staying here.
Chris, Richard, Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today on PharmaComms TV. It was absolutely fascinating and as ever educational. And hopefully we'll get to catch up on this again after the next race. So thank you very much.